Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Flora Ma, Manager of the Market Outreach Division at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. On behalf of the Alliance Commercial Banks, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to join today's roundtable. Powering the Future, Innovations in Energy Efficiency, co-hosted by the Alliance and Citi. The Alliance is an initiative to connect commercial banks dedicated to green financing, financial institutions, research institutions, and innovative technology providers with the aim of supporting such commercial banks on their journey towards becoming leading green institutions. The Alliance was launched in November 2020 by IFC and its first regional anchor, the HKMA, and is supported by the China World Bank Group Partnership Facility and the World Bank Group SDG Partnership Fund. We invite you to visit the Alliance website for more information and register online to receive regular updates about the Alliance activities, including its upcoming events. Without further ado, may I now pass the stage to our moderator of the day, Ms. Rafe Erasmus, Asia Pacific Head of Citi's Sustainability and Corporate Transition Team. Rafe, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you. I am Rafe Erasmus, and I lead Citi's Sustainability and Corporate Transition Group for Asia Pacific, where we focus on providing sustainability and transition advice to our corporate and investment banking clients and supporting them in their progress towards a net zero economy. On behalf of Citi, we would like to thank HKMA and IFC for inviting us to organize and co-host the roundtable today for the Alliance for Green Commercial Banks. The topic for discussion today is Powering the Future, Innovations in Energy Efficiency. Now, energy efficiency has been named by the IEA as the first fuel in clean energy transitions, as it provides some of the quickest and most cost-effective carbon mitigation options, whilst lowering energy bills and strengthening energy security. Yet, energy efficiency is often underappreciated when we speak about the energy transition, and the conversation has often focused on the build-out of new renewable energy capacity. Adopting a cleaner alternative energy source is important, but the greenest kilowatt hour is actually the one we have never consumed. And saving energy, not using energy, is the cheapest energy. So energy efficiency is just as important as the transition to new, no and low carbon energy sources. As we have seen countries introduce new or strengthened their energy efficiency policies, as the European Union increased the deployment of renewables and diversified their energy supply chain in response to the energy crisis, they have also implemented stronger rules to boost energy efficiency, nearly doubling the rate of annual energy savings that the EU countries are obliged to deliver each year from 2024 to 2030. Similarly, the US Inflation Reduction Act will not only boost the development of new technologies, but also substantially boost energy efficiency actions. Now, over the past 2 decades, improvements in the energy intensity of the economy have halved the carbon emissions that would otherwise have resulted from increasing global population and income. However, to meet the IEA net zero scenario, a sustained improvement will be required to lift the annual progress from the 2% achieved last year to around 4% per annum between now and 2030. To reach the energy savings milestones in the net zero scenario, efficiency will need to improve by almost 40% in residential buildings, by just under 35% in car mobility, and by just over 15% in industry by the end of this decade. This means that gains which have taken us 2 decades in the past will need to be achieved in just 8 years. For businesses, there is a strong case to invest in energy efficiency. Whilst there are initial costs involved, the upfront investment into energy efficiency projects pays for itself over time in the form of lower operating costs. At the same time, energy efficiency projects can improve the resilience of businesses, reducing the exposure to volatile global energy markets and electricity prices. Here at Citi, we have structured innovative financing solutions to support our clients in the financing of their energy efficiency projects. our global head of Clean Energy Finance Group, Mr. Marshall Salant, has shared energy efficiency financing structures at a previous knowledge session for the Alliance, which is available on the website. Today, we'll be focusing on the importance of energy efficiency in the implementation of corporate decarbonization plans and the achievement of net zero goals. We will also be speaking on the investment trends in the energy efficiency space, as well as the role that digitalization and artificial intelligence can play in improving energy efficiency. We're very honored to have with us today 3 guests for our panel discussion: Mike Lim, Hendrik Rosenthal, and Parag Sharma. And let me introduce them first of all. Mike Lim is a partner at Triac, a Singapore-headquartered venture capital firm focused on decarbonization investments. Mike has more than 20 years of experience in strategic business planning execution with a focus on strategic advisory, fundraising, M&A, and corporate finance. He previously held various senior management roles in investment banking and corporations in Asia, including director at Third Rock and Sotero Capital. He was also a former debt capital markets manager at Norin Chukin Bank, the founder of several IoT and food tech startups. Hendrik, he is the director of Group Sustainability for CLP Holdings, one of the largest investor-owned power businesses in Asia Pacific, with investments in Greater China, Australia, India, and Thailand. Hendrik is responsible for the group's sustainability-related strategy, reporting, and communications, and he advises on sustainability matters of the group's power business in the Asia Pacific region. A sustainability veteran with more than 20 years of experience across the public, private, and NGO sectors, Hendrik currently sits on a number of committees on sustainability-related matters, including as director of the International Emissions Trading Association, as well as co-chair of the Sustainability Committee for the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, amongst others. Last but not least, Parag. Parag leads the Global AI Center of Excellence at Citi and has been instrumental in driving the development of AI-related infrastructure across our organization. Parag has led R&D teams and technology consultants for over 15 years, working on emerging technologies with startups and multinationals across multiple sectors. He also previously co-founded 2 startups. Welcome, Hendrik, Mike, and Parag. Thank you very much for joining us today. And now we go on to the questions of the day, and I hope you will have much to take away with you today. The first question I'd like to address to Hendrik. Hendrik, we've talked about the importance of energy efficiency in achieving net zero GHG emissions. Now, we're aware that CLP has set an ambitious target to achieve net zero emissions across its value chain by 2050. Could you talk to us a little about how energy efficiency strategy fits into your broader short, mid, and long-term decarbonization goals, and what initiatives has CLP undertaken to encourage businesses and residential customers, and actually the community at large, to use energy more efficiently?
Yes, certainly, and thanks very much again also for having CLP join the discussion today. From a group perspective, for us, our Scope 1 emissions are obviously key in terms of decarbonizing the electricity that we send to customers. So it is a 2-pronged approach that we take. Fundamentally, we are working on reducing that carbon content of our customers' everyday consumption. But at the same time, we recognize that there's a real need to support our customers in energy efficiency initiatives as well. So essentially, we are, to some extent, also working in the space of helping our customers use less of our core product, if you like, right? So this is, I think, something that really needs to be recognized. But be that as it may, this is an opportunity for us from the perspective of providing our expertise to the market, sharing insights with our customers in terms of supporting their own initiatives. And we build businesses around that, but we also deploy support mechanisms that have been developed here, particularly for Hong Kong, that have been developed together with the government to ensure that our product is not wasted. That's really quite fundamental. We want to make sure that whatever electrons we do send and gets received by the customer is utilized to the greatest extent possible. We can provide a business around that and supporting our customers. Some of it is free to the extent, for example, we provide energy audit services to larger customers and really just work with them to identify the biggest bang for the buck in terms of savings that they have potentially within their own operating environment. We've been working also on sustainability-linked loans, supporting customers to actually make investment decisions into their own buildings or sort of retrofits that have real carbon savings at the end of the day. But sometimes these are difficult to finance. Sometimes there's real challenges in terms of bringing across some of these projects simply because the economics may not just be right at this stage. It's been quite challenging in some of these areas, if you think of it, to that in Hong Kong in particular, the price of electricity is relatively low, actually, compared to other major cities across the world. Yes, it has increased over the last year or so, in particular with the energy crisis, but we are looking at a relatively marginal increase and from a relatively low base compared to other major cities, whether that's London, Berlin, or New York even. So that the economics of investing in infrastructure or equipment or appliances that enable a higher degree of efficiency is still to some degree limited. So there's definitely different funding mechanisms. We have what we call an eco-building fund, for example. That's a scheme we deploy here in Hong Kong that really helps our residential, commercial, industrial buildings to actually implement some improvement works. There's an electrical equipment upgrade scheme. And these are sort of targets we have in mind for our customers together. They've been developed together with government that we are keen to meet so that the overall demand from existing building stock in particular is lowered. We continue to see growth in demand for our core products. So there is a continued expansion in the building stock, but also the electrification of transport and industry otherwise will continue to put pressure on the generation of electricity and will continue to put pressure on us to deliver additional electrons into the grid. So that's also why we don't really feel threatened by this energy efficiency drive. Instead, we see it as an opportunity. There will be an increased demand regardless, and we just need to make sure that this precious resource actually just doesn't get wasted in the process. And we've also been building new business lines in terms of providing energy as a service to the extent, for example, we have projects that we've implemented for cooling as a service. We provide a contract, a guarantee that your building will be cooled to a certain temperature, and we will take the energy liability to that extent to make sure that actually happens, and you get a service, and that is a cooled building. We don't meter you as such through this arrangement on the amount of electricity that you consume, so that we then get incentives as well to make this as energy efficient as possible. So there's different schemes already in place to support some of this work.
Thank you so much, Hendrik. I like what you said in terms of you don't feel threatened by the energy efficiency drive, but you are looking to make sure that the precious resource that we have is not wasted. Mike, maybe turning to you, picking up on what Hendrik just said about the economics of investing into technologies that helps to increase energy efficiency. That they're not necessarily always stack up. Mike, how do you see in your space, and what do you see as key opportunities in terms of investments as well as risks in the energy efficiency space? Are you able to share with us some interesting companies in your portfolio which are providing energy efficiency solutions?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Rev, and thanks for inviting me for this online event. I think if you read the report by IEA on energy efficiency, you would have probably noticed that a lot of what has happened over the past couple of years is largely concentrated in the areas of mobility and in the building space. But to really decarbonize going forward, it's important that energy efficiency also has to take place in the hard to abate areas, such as in the industries, such for example, in steelmaking, cement manufacturing, petrochemical, data centers, etc., etc. So what the report's actually telling me is that I think we have more or less have the solution for the low-lying fruits here in terms of achieving the energy efficiency goals that we have in mind here. And the challenge going forward is actually in how do we bring energy efficiency in the hard to abate sectors that I've mentioned earlier. And as an investors, as a venture capital investors, these are the areas that actually we are looking at. Game-changing technologies that can actually bring about energy efficiency in all this industry. In general, as a venture capital, we don't really invest in the areas of, for example, in IoT sensor or in LED lights, for example, because technologically wise, it's not really defensible. It's more of a commodity now. So what's going forward is we're looking for technology that can actually, serve more of a breakthrough for the industries that are looking for energy efficiency solutions for whatever they are producing as of this moment. So I'll give an example of data centers. I mean, actually, if you look at what's going on right now, we have a big trend towards decarbonization, energy efficiency. And then we have the other big trend that's ongoing right now is actually in the space of digitalization, right? But if you think about digitalization, whenever there's data being sent, being consumed, you are actually also consuming a lot of energy, all right? So this is actually a clash of two major trends that's going on right now. And I don't think digitalization is going to slow down going forward. So the question that we are asking as a venture capitalist is, are there technology out there that can actually serve both mega trend that's going on right now in terms of the world's digitalizing, but at the same time, how can we bring about energy efficiency when people actually are consuming data? So we are looking at the areas, for example, of silicon photonics. It's a new technology in the semiconductor field. And what's actually happening is that if we are able to change how data is being transmitted at the data center side, by allowing them to actually perform as it is right now, but consuming a lot lesser energy, that would be really interesting. So as a venture capitalist, we're actually looking into technology like this. And I'm glad to say there are actually a few startups out in the market right now that are actually working on technology like this, which potentially would have a huge impact on energy efficiency in the hard to abate areas, the likes of data centers that I mentioned earlier on.
Thank you very much, Mark. We certainly would like to come back to the topic of digitalization, but perhaps in the meantime, just a question: investment, capacity for you, or the amounts of investments we're seeing in the market. Now, we've seen record highs of $600 billion last year into energy efficiency, projects. Are you seeing at all a slowdown in investments in energy efficiency given the headwinds we are facing, particularly in this region? Are you seeing differences in terms of developed economies versus developing economies? I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you how you're seeing the overall funding activities in this space and in this region.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting observation. I think in general, investment in this space has been growing. I think this year is kind of slowed down, but it's a general trend. We are seeing slowdown in almost different sectors, not only in the energy efficiency sectors, but in general, I think there's still interest in this space at the moment. There is a difference in terms of whether you're talking about investing in this space in the developed economies or a developing economies. I think in general, if you look at the more developed economies in this region, I think energy efficiency has been pretty matured in a sense. I think a lot has been done. Yes, there's a lot more that we can do, but I think more or less what needs to be done already has been achieved. I mean, the likes of having energy efficient appliances, LED lights. I think that's more or less done in the developed economies. But in terms of the developing economies, I think this is where things get really interesting because they are actually behind the curve. And we are seeing a lot more interest actually in rolling out energy efficiency technology and solutions into the developing economies in Asia in general. A good example is EVs, electric vehicles. I think EVs is pretty entrenched in for example the likes of China. For example, I think in Hong Kong, in Singapore, we do have a growing number of EVs. Yes, it's still room to grow. But what we're seeing is actually we're seeing a huge interest in terms of investment into the space of two-wheelers EVs, right? Electric motorbikes, for example. Whether it's in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, I think there's a huge interest in terms of people putting in money to invest into the space. So I think in terms of opportunity set right now in the energy efficiency space, I do see quite a huge opportunity set right now in terms of investing into energy efficiency, especially in the developing nation in Asia.
Understood. Thank Mark. I think the key takeaway is breakthrough technologies in hard-to-abate sectors, as you said, where there's probably less technological, certainly kind of advancement at the moment, and opportunity set in the developing countries. Hendrik, if I could kind of switch to you again, you've spoken about just now about some of the investments you are making in energy efficiencies. Just wondering what sorts of emerging energy efficiency technologies are you seeing, and are there any particular ones that you would highlight that CLP has adopted, which has had a significant impact on your emissions reduction?
Yeah, sure. Just to sort of also build on what Mike just said in terms of the low-hanging fruits perhaps remaining. Also, if I were to refer specifically to Hong Kong, I would completely agree that has already been harvested to some extent for new builds or newer buildings that have come online in the last few years. It's the existing building stock, I would argue, that remains a big challenge for us here. And there's much still to be done. And that's where the challenge really comes in terms of the incentives or lack thereof for building owners. And there's issues around ownership structure, tenants versus owners, who's doing what, why would I, as a tenant, perhaps make any changes, or as an owner even bother because I'm not paying the electricity bill. So there's some very fundamental issues there. But also just if you get through that challenge, the sheer cost of retrofits or upgrades, whether that's electrical lighting or the elevators, escalators, simple things, and of course the air conditioning in particular, the cost of that and the return of that investment may still be quite long. So what sort of mechanisms can be put in place to make that happen? I personally am quite interested, for example, in exploring the route of carbon credits and whether these can be utilized as a tool to finance some of these changes that still provide opportunity for improvement. But this is sort of an additional thought. I just wanted to build on what Mike had said. But going back to your question in terms of the priority technologies, I guess, that we're looking at. Obviously, e-mobility is a big piece that we are interested in supporting that growth. And the government here in Hong Kong has been quite helpful to push that forward. I think we have one of the largest EV penetration rates in the world. And it's just so easy to do in this sort of area in terms of the geographic boundary we have for driving in Hong Kong. It just makes sense actually to be going back to where I started earlier with our scope 1 emissions from the generation of electricity, even with a fossil component remaining, which we are working to reduce and have substantially reduced, that carbon content of of a electric vehicle versus a petrol-based vehicle is roughly half. So there is already still savings to be had in terms of electrifying transport, even though we are not yet delivering that zero carbon electricity that we're working on. So that's a big piece for us. Smart grids is sort of a nice buzzword, right? But ultimately, it's about the metering infrastructure that we have to put in place. So the smart meters really then enabling our customers to have access to their daily or hourly, rather, consumption of electricity, where in the household is the electricity being consumed, perhaps even going to the extent of being able to remotely control some of that consumption. So if you forget to turn your aircon off, you can do that while you're on the MTR going to work. These sort of measures really should be coming much more commonplace, and we've invested quite a bit in terms of deploying these smart meters. Over 2 million have been put into place, so that's roughly 70% of our customer base here in Hong Kong. We are working on closing the remaining gap, and that's a good opportunity as we see it. And another example that's worth highlighting perhaps is our cooling as a service piece that I mentioned earlier, where we have worked with ChinaChem actually as one of our customers. This is a real project, a build, own, operate, and transfer project for the cooling service. So we then own the cooling system for 20 years of one of the buildings that ChinaChem Group has here in Hong Kong. And through that process, then deliver on that cooling commitment, but overall consumption of electricity is projected to be some 50% lower than it was before the project started. So this is the type of work we can actually deliver. And at that scale, it makes sense, but it's the little pieces here and there that are everywhere around the city still. That old building stock, the existing building stock, that's where I think there's still quite a bit of work we could do. And that really requires quite a bit of collaboration across industry, across the sectors, and to some extent government as well.
Thank you, Hendrik. That's really interesting. And I wanted to go back and pick up on a point that Mike noted about digitalization. With greater digitalization, of course, we are consuming more data, we're using more data centers, there's more energy efficiency. At the same time, I was interested in the topic of artificial intelligence, so perhaps I can address this to Prag. Prag, AI is not a new concept. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, particularly generative AI, and what are some of the use cases of this technology in terms of energy efficiencies?
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. Usually I'm not allowed out because AI is, I mean, it's interesting, but it's not the hottest topic on the planet. It is actually the hottest topic on the planet nowadays, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about it, especially in the energy efficiency space, because there is so much that this technology has already brought in the background, but it is likely to bring in the future as well, and that's what we should discuss. So firstly, when we talk about efficiency, we're more generally talking about a couple of things, maybe reducing waste or optimizing a process. And actually optimizing a process is exactly what this technology does, given the right criteria. So digitization or data, for example, is one thing, but this is exactly where it excels at. So given that this is a core area of artificial intelligence more generally, it has already been used in many things that both Hendrik and Mike have pointed to. So what can we do with the AI? We can look at research and design. So from the very fundamental onwards, and I think Mike mentioned that he's looking at some startups. Fundamentally, from R&D perspective, how can machine learning accelerate
Parag, we're having some trouble
process,
hearing you.
finding new materials across the board. We can then look at, hello?
Parag, you may have to repeat just the last maybe 30 seconds. You broke up there.
I apologize. Am I back now?
Yes, you are.
Yes. So sometimes this happens, and I want to say this is why we cannot wholly rely on artificial intelligence either. Our internet connections can still be weak, putting to waste all the good effort we're putting in this space. So please keep that in mind as we rely too much on this technology, but we'll talk about that later in terms of what the risks are. But from a usage perspective, there are many, many use cases here, right from R&D, design, development, deployment, management and maintenance, monitoring, collection and control. Each of these steps makes up the processes that help us deliver on these solutions, and machine learning and AI can do that. So we have briefly talked about smart buildings, smart cities, and smart homes, and I think both Henrik and Mike made some interesting comments around while there are low-hanging fruits, there is more that can be done there, and I think that more that can be done, part of it can be done through machine learning and AI. But part of it can just be done by digitizing and getting better access, such as having remote sensors in the right places that can collect that data, for example, or other things. But certainly machine learning and AI is going to play a role. You notice that I'm using those terms interchangeably because generally the public uses it interchangeably. Machine learning simply means more complex algorithms that consume more data and can make better predictions. So if you whittle it down, that's really the promise that's here. You give us more data, which we now have. So more buildings are generating more digital content. We are digitizing more things, including our power grids, our storage mechanisms, our consumption examples. If there is more data, then we can use more of that data with more complex machine learning algorithms. We can do that because there is more hardware now that we can buy, access, scale to do that. We also have more algorithms that can scale to utilize these large data. So all of this means we can do more. But I think it was Mike or Henrik that made an interesting point. There is a downside to this utilizing more and more machine learning. I'm based in Ireland, and one of the early stats that came out was some of these large language models will start to consume as much electricity as Ireland does in a year. Some high-level examples there were showing that, which is interesting. So energy consumption with these models themselves has to get better in the meantime. But in terms of use cases, accelerate science for materials development, generate and demand forecasting and scheduling, all of these things can be done better. They can be hyper-personalized, and I wanted to use this word. Hyper-personalization means we can go down to the level of an individual if we have the data for that individual, if we have a data for that building, if we have the data for that city. We can really start to hyper-personalize and make efficiency gains that were just not possible before. And I'll finish up with one more thing. So we have talked about generative AI, you mentioned, right? This is what the hype is at. Generative AI has come onto the scene, and we're even more interested in AI now. But there are many machine learning algorithms that already exist and have been quietly working in the background to optimize many of the processes. The reason we are so happy about or interested in generative AI is, if you think about it, 80% of the data that we digitally generate is unstructured. It includes text, it includes document, it includes audio, visual, images. All of these data, computers before the last 6 months or a year, could analyze this data to some degree, but they could not analyze the data as well as they can now. By that, I mean, generative AI, large language models are starting to understand context of what you're saying in different languages. They're starting to become the interface that you can use to execute a subsequent downstream process. So if you wanted to analyze a complex piece of scenario, you don't need an analyst to write you some code. You can actually talk to large language models that can generate that code for you, returning a piece of analysis that you can utilize much faster to make a decision in real time. So it is what generative AI is doing is bringing the machine learning and AI technology that was niche, that only specialist developers or people who knew how to develop these algorithms could do. It is now bringing it to a larger audience, so more people can do a bit more hands-on themselves. So that's some of the things. More compute, more data, more digitization, more open source technologies means that energy efficiency is another field that will continue to be affected by machine learning, even more so because there are so many low-hanging fruits. But it's not just going to be machine learning itself. We need improvements in hardware, remote devices. We need improvements in the machine learning algorithms themselves. They consume too much energy as they stand today. And then we need to scale this across individuals, buildings, cities, and more globally.
Thank you, Prak. And since you mentioned it, will you also address what are some of the risks that's been, I think when you speak about AI, there are perhaps different feelings towards it and perhaps a level of caution. What do you see as the risks associated with AI in particular in the application of energy efficiencies?
Yeah, many risks. Okay, so one thing we always focus on as a group is, listen, this is amazing. Let's go deploy tomorrow and we will be saved. Any targets we were hoping to get will now be gotten. We just need to deploy generative AI. Actually, that is not the case. One of the first issues to keep in mind is technology has always been our savior. Okay, many in different forms over the last few centuries, but we need certain things in place to utilize this technology. In our case, we need the right data and the right quality of data. We need to collect that. It needs to be timely. It needs to be available. This is a big piece that people overlook even in the energy efficiency space. One of the risks is we are not collecting enough data, yet we think machine learning or AI will somehow come and solve our problems. So we need to equally focus on that basics, which is collect the right data, utilize the right data, and then make that right data available beyond our own borders so that others can consume. So that's one risk, that we're focusing on outcomes, but we're not focusing on the inputs of what is going to help us meet our targets, which is in at least specifically in the machine learning and the AI world, or more in the digital space, because that's equally important. It's the collection of that data. The other thing is we are overemphasizing how much these technologies can actually end up doing for us. Anybody who's in this space has heard of AI winters and AI summers. We're in the hottest AI summer ever. Everyone is interested in AI. We're all investing in it. All the senior leaders want to deploy it tomorrow. There's good reason for that, as I mentioned. Data, hardware, open source models, all of these have come together and we can do things with it. But the over-reliance on this technology without understanding the limitations is going to be an issue. Today's models, for example, are not the end-all and be-all of where this is going. Today, these models can produce wrong results, which is okay that if it's spam filtering. It is not okay if it is huge amounts of data on a scale of a building or a city that is likely to lead to an opposite effect to energy efficiency. So we need to be careful of the outcomes. We need robust measures to understand whether the outcomes are correct or not. This still needs to be developed, including in the energy efficiency space. And finally, we want to make sure we understand what's happening under the hood to some degree. It's not okay to deploy large models. They're producing stuff. We're delighted with the outcome because it seems to be going our way. And then we're off. And sorry, my final point, edge cases cannot be handled by machine learning algorithms. Okay, so think of COVID recently. Many of the existing machine learning algorithms were not able to make predictions because that data point does not exist. We need to keep that in mind as we deploy these technologies. There are many scenarios and cases where these are not going to be good enough to support us. What are the backup plans and how are we mitigating those risks?
Thank you, Prak. I'm glad to hear there is still a place for the human brain, at least for situations where we have no
just
data.
About, Rafa, just about.
Perhaps I'll switch over to Mike now. Prak has spoken a little bit about some of the technologies and what he's seeing in AI. I was wondering if you could share with us what kind of technological advancements you are seeing as a VC investor, and also in particular, what are some of the key challenges that you're seeing some of these new energy efficiency companies face in scaling up?
Yeah, sure. Since we are on the topic of AI, definitely AI is an area that we're looking at. I think Prak is spot on. AI has actually many capabilities that actually can help us solve the current problem that we're facing. And in terms of whether it's in asset optimization, whether it's in terms of discovery of new materials, I think these are things that we are actually looking at. It is not a direct route towards energy efficiency. But for example, right, if in the terms of the discovery of new materials, it would actually enable us to do things in a better form, maybe achieving more efficiency through that, because maybe the materials of the future is lighter, stronger, and therefore require less energy for us. So, I mean, this is definitely an area that we look at. So from an AI perspective, since we are on the AI topic, I earlier on mentioned about in the semiconductor field, we are looking at the areas of silicon photonics, because silicon photonics have the potential to actually change the way that data is being transmitted. And I think this is something which I think we all agree. If we want to reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming at the data centers, we really need to have a paradigm shift in the way that we are actually transmitting the data itself. And as a VC, we believe that silicon photonics technology is an area which has the potential to do that. The other areas that we're looking at are in the hard-to-abate industry that I mentioned earlier, whether it's in the steel making industry and the cement making industry. This heavy industry actually consumes a lot of energy. So coming back to your question, what are the risks? I wouldn't see it as risk, but I'll see it as a challenge. So coming back to the example which Hendrik mentioned earlier, I think it's easy to implement energy efficient solution when things are new, but when things are already been built, the overheads are already there, and now you're asking the factories to change the way that they do things by putting in new machines, for example. I think that's a very big challenge when it comes to energy efficiency, implementing energy efficiency solutions in the hard-to-abate area. That's the general challenges that we see, not just in the building sectors that Hendrik mentioned, but also in the other big heavy emitters industries that we are looking at this moment. And I kind of agreed with Hendrik in the sense that we need a multi-stakeholder collaboration to actually get this solved. And I think one of the very big, I should say, catalysts for things to happen in all the sectors, actually, we need to have some form of regulatory framework from the government, whether it's in the sense of stick and carrot, to actually push the hard-to-abate sectors to actually really seriously think about investing into energy efficiency technologies, because it means they have to maybe pay or have a heavy capex upfront. But in the long run, I think they, like you mentioned, I think they will make it back. But most companies would think of the short terms because they have shareholders to report to and they have to make sure that they have dividends to give out. So how can we actually strike a balance? Can the government play a role here? Can banks actually come in and play a role here in terms of providing the different financial instruments of financial stack, we call it, that can actually help heavy emitters to actually implement solutions that maybe is very expensive for them upfront, but beneficial in the long run. Yeah. So in general, that's the view that we have when we look at the energy efficiency space, especially when it comes to the challenges and what are the things that need to fall in place for a solution like this to actually start being implemented going forward.
Thank you, Mike. We actually do have a solution. I think I mentioned in my opening remark that Citi has come up with an energy efficiency funding structure, which essentially frees up companies' balance sheets for the operations and actually help them handle or fund the initial cost and operate and transform that into an operating cost and upfront investment. So for those who are online, I encourage you to go back and look at that webinar. Actually, that's on the website. But since you touched on collaboration and Hendrik touched on collaboration, maybe I'll address this to Hendrik. Hendrik, how important have your partnerships been in driving your agenda for energy efficiency? I think you mentioned China Chem just now, and would love to have your views on what more we can do, what more can be done to foster an enabling regulatory environment to encourage energy efficiency projects and practices.
Yeah, well, that's a challenging question. But I mean, fundamentally, if I just go back to Hong Kong, there is a sort of step-by-step approach that the government is taking here. There was an announcement in the policy address just the week before last, I think, or last week, on the Building Energy Efficiency Ordinance. They will be ratcheting things up a little bit. They will be requiring more frequent energy audits and also making that energy audit information more publicly available, so that there's transparency in this market in terms of what's achievable. We can work together to really identify the optimal solutions and have some level of knowledge transfer, so that not every building owner has to start from scratch. So I think that's quite important in terms of deploying some of these solutions, and really just having some level of oversight of how to make this happen. And I'm pretty much stuck on the existing building stock when I speak on these issues, given that's such a big focus for us here in Hong Kong, and it is actually the biggest footprint in terms of the consumption. So it is that partnership, that collaboration. We can, as an individual organization, can provide incentives, we can provide support, we can provide some of the solutions, and the government can provide this enabling environment to actually push this forward. But it's always light touch in terms of regulation in this market. So there will always be that leeway, I think, in terms of letting the market decide how and when to deploy what, right? So I think that's sort of the starting point of this collaboration, if you like, where it isn't so much a hard stick approach. You must retrofit. It's more about how do we incentivize the market to make that switch. I think that's where we need to focus. And just having looked at the space in this region for many decades now, it's not going to move with a hard regulatory approach. That's not the style. That's not the sort of preferred way of solving issues. It is really about finding the economic angle in this space so that we deploy our resources efficiently as possible, right? And I go back to the example: can we deploy credits? Can we find some innovative solutions to really make that switch happen, and to find additional incentive mechanisms, market mechanisms that can facilitate greater collaboration and more sharing in terms of knowledge and expertise, but also just deploying the actual technologies at the end of the day. So yeah, it's not, like I said, not an easy question. I don't have a sort of a crystal ball on how to solve it, but I think we really need to think outside the box, outside a regulatory environment, and find market solutions that can then help the different pieces, whether that's from a financing, from a technology, or just the actual asset owners, come together to create a real mechanism. It's not about, not to be too upfront about it, but trying to save the planet. And this is a good thing, and we all need to sort of coalesce to make this happen. It's nice, but we've been talking about this for decades, and that's not going to move the needle. We really need to find a mechanism that is real and makes financial sense and enables us to actually deploy. We've been talking about existing technologies for the best part anyways. This is not rocket science, actually. It's just how do we make it financially viable? I think that's really the question.
Thank you, Hendrik. Mike, switching back to you, do you agree with that view, that not hard regulatory approach, light regulatory, perhaps touch to incentivize, and the market needs to find, I guess we need to find a market solution and an economic angle?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm 100% concurring with what Hendrik mentioned. I think regulatory regime framework is just a starting point. It actually kind of catalyze, what people's going to do next. but you still need to have technology out there. You still need to have financing stack that actually enable people to actually start adopting energy efficiency solution going forward. And I like what Hendrik mentioned, right? I mean, yes, we are here to save the earth, to save the world, do good for the future. But at the end of the day, if you look at businesses, right? That only makes sense if it makes economic sense for them, right? And that's the only way to make sure that the whatever solution that we are implementing is sustainable for the long run. It shouldn't be based on short-term government incentive, for example, because what happens when governments start withdrawing incentive? Are we going back to the old ways? So I think we have to adopt the mindset that when the government put in certain framework, it's just a starting point. Eventually, we still need solutions that make economical sense for whether it's a consumer or businesses, for them to actually start implementing solutions that can help them be more efficient.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think perhaps before we wrap up, just one final question for all our panelists today is any final words or key takeaways that you'd like to share with our participants today? I think we've covered a lot, but we'd like to open to all of you to add any final takeaways. Parag, perhaps I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the key takeaway is technology will continue to play a key role in this. Technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, but they on their own are not enough. We need to be careful of the limitations of these technologies as they stand today, but also focus on utilizing them because they are a key component. And there are many things that need to go with this technology: the infrastructure, the data, the regulatory requirements, and other things to enable this ecosystem. But the key component, one that we should not overlook, is technology, especially the likes of AI and generative AI in certain aspects of energy efficiency, of the energy efficiency world.
Thank you, Parag. Hendrik?
Yeah, no, I mean, we need to be conscious of deploying everything we got, right? And energy efficiency is certainly one component. There's a lot to be had. It's like I said already, there's existing technologies that can support a transition to waste less of a precious resource, electricity. But at the same time, a utility like CLP needs to do its part, and every other utility in this market needs to do its part to decarbonize the source and decarbonize that electricity, so that collectively not one solution will fix it all. We just need to deploy as many solutions as possible. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you. Well said, Hendrik. And lastly, Mike, any final key takeaways you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, Hendrik kind of steal my line. Well, basically, I think we are all in agreement here that there's no silver bullet in terms of solving the problem that we're facing right now when it comes to climate change, and energy efficiency is just one of it. But it's a very good starting point by being less wasteful, using less to gain more. I think this is a very good starting point. And obviously, that's just the beginning, because to really solve to really help us decarbonize going forward, we definitely need a lot more than that. But instead of just going for the moonshot, I mean, I'm a venture capitalist. We don't go for moonshot all the time. We believe that there are things that can be done right now, and gaining energy efficiency is definitely a very good starting point for us to solve the climate issues that we're facing.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you again to Mike, Hendrik, and Parag, our panelists, for sharing their thoughts today. I thought that was a very interesting conversation, and perhaps if I may wrap this up with some of the key messages I heard, it's one, we really need to not waste a very precious resource that we have. Energy efficiency, as Mike says, is the beginning, but it's also a very important thing to focus on. We need to use less to gain more. There are clear opportunities to invest in energy efficiency projects, for instance, in hard-to-abate sectors, very much in developing countries, and also looking for breakthrough technologies in this space. And there are challenges. Existing stock, for instance, trying to transform existing stock to be more energy efficient, much more difficult than looking at new assets. But we will get there. I think if we have collaboration across the board, regulation is important to lay the backdrop to incentivize businesses and stakeholders to invest in energy efficiency projects. But clearly the market also needs to find a commercial and economic angle for this to really take root. And lastly, I'll end with what Parag said, as in technology, clearly a very key component of energy efficiency, but in and of itself, not enough. We need a whole ecosystem to make this happen. I hope that everyone today, all our audiences, has had a good time listening and had much to take away with them. And with that, perhaps if I can hand back to Flora to close the session.
Thank you, Rafe, and all the panelists. With that, we have come to the end of today's roundtable. Thank you for your participation in the Alliance event. Please take a moment to complete a satisfaction survey to help us deliver more relevant content as well as create a more seamless experience. You can find the link in your browser after the webinar ends. Your responses and personal data collected in the survey are confidential and will only be accessed by the Alliance. We will not share the information with any third parties. If you haven't subscribed to the Alliance newsletter, we will also like to encourage you to sign up to receive our latest announcements, webinars and training invitations, and reports to stay on top of the shifting global green finance market. Once again, the Alliance hopes that today's event inspires ideas and discussions around the ways that we can make our city more sustainable and the world a better place. See you all in our next event.